Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. Today's episode, do you think moving your house is hard? With Dr. Deden Rukmana, professor and chairperson of the Department of Community and Regional Planning at Alabama A&M University. The Planning Commission podcast is a discussion you never even knew you needed. Sit back, join us for a conversation between a couple of old friends and their guests to talk about all the things that are happening in this wide-ranging profession called planning. Our views are our own and don't reflect those of any national planning organizations or any particular public agencies and only belong to us. So read your commission packet, know your Robert's rules, and enjoy this, the Planning Commission podcast. All right, let's start with roll. Commissioner Kostelek.
Present.
And I am here. We are missing our third wonderful commissioner, Commissioner Minshaw, who is still battling a severe case of laryngitis. So we hope she's on the mend and will be back with us before you know it. All right, our agenda today, our discussion item, our whiskey pairing, our interview, and our lightning round. My one and only commissioner. Can I have a motion to approve?
Do we have I guess we have a quorum. So yes. So
2 out of 3. Yeah,
Yeah.
Chairperson can vote
Yeah.
if I have to. Right,
Okay.
break a tie.
All right.
Okay.
Way to go, Mayor.
Know your Robert's rules, for crying out loud. You're on a Planning Commission podcast. Jeez. All right. Just as a reminder to our audience, you can find all our past meetings on our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Head over to YouTube, Amazon, or Apple. Please subscribe, like, and give us some feedback. And email us at planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. All right, man, do we have a story? We have a story for our listeners today. This is a story that is quite profound. And our guest is an expert on what's going on and is going to share his perspectives and insight on this momentarily. But the gist of it is, without giving everything away, because listeners, you're going to hang on and listen to the interview, correct? Yes, okay. Existential threat. That's quite the term. We throw that term around a lot, I think. And I don't know if it is necessarily always apropos. In this case, I think it is. I mean, we're talking about such significant shifts in the Earth's climate that we are having to take dire action, and the consequences, significant action and dire consequences. And this story happens to involve Indonesia, which is the 4th largest, most populated country on the planet, just behind the United States, with about 280 million people. Man, oh man. So we've had some past guests on. We've scratched the surface about climate change in some various ways and how it's affecting us. But in this instance, this story, again, is going to make you shake your head. So my discussion item, our question, Dawn, I'll ask you and of course myself, is what is an element of climate change that, in essence, maybe we're just simply turning our head about and ignoring? There's so many ways that the causes and the effects are ultimately impacting humanity. I'm curious on the cause or the effect. Are there things you think that we're just kind of turning a blind eye to, and because of the convenience? And I'll let you stew and think about that, because I'll share with you some things I've seen recently. One, I watched a documentary. It was a little show the other day on PBS. It was about, and I don't remember the name of the island, but it was an island near Fiji in Australia, right in that vicinity, that is having dire effects. It's just consuming this island, and they interviewed the people who live there and showed literally just what's happening. And here's this wonderful culture, that is facing, I don't know about extinction, but certainly their way of life. And there's just not much that they can do about that, of course. But imagine that. Imagine your entire neighborhood, city, state, what have you, forcing a relocation. And that's just, it's so incredibly sad. But the other one I'll say is on the cause side of things, meat, beef in particular. I mean, I don't think we quite grasp the massive global impact of eating a burger, eating a steak, that the rainforests are being in South America are being bulldozed and lit on fire to create pasture lands for cows to temporarily, by the way, graze for only a handful of years to meet the demand of global beef consumption, right? What is happening in this country, and that over 30% of greenhouse gas emissions come from cows, come from
Yeah.
livestock. And like, my goodness, we don't talk about that. And as I watched recently, one expert who actually raises cattle but is grass-fed pasture in a much more sustainable way, but a way that is way more difficult than the industrial methods. He's just like, we're killing our planet for the sake of a $1.99 cheeseburger. And you just go, man, you know, we should talk about this more and more and more, but we're just not. And of course, there's economic interests at heart, and there's the murkiness that comes along with it. But, that's truth. That's reality. So, all right, what do you have?
I think about there was a show on several years ago. I think it was called A World Without People or After Us or something like that. And they just profiled that if we had some sort of apocalyptic event, what would happen in a city like Atlanta? And they kind of modeled how fast it would become overrun with kudzu.
Yeah.
They looked at like the Anheuser-Busch Brewing Company in St. Louis and talked about what would happen if all of a sudden that plant shut down, but that beer was left to ferment in those tanks and eventually exploded and then flowed into the water streams and things. And so the reason I say that, and in reading the stories of what's going on in Indonesia and what they're working on in our guest today, I think of the time and the work we've done up in Alaska and
Mm,
hearing from professionals up there working with coastal and native communities of having to move their entire villages inland where they've been for thousands of years. But then the thing of like we talk about sometimes in a place like Alaska, it's not easy to find the place to build something like a landfill. Well, what happens when sea level rise overtakes that landfill and those things start to leach
yeah.
in there? Not even mentioning coastal refineries and all these other things that we have in the country. So I think of that After Us or World Without People or whatever it was called and go, imagine that kind of actually happening while humans are still here if we don't get a grasp on some of those things. And I get tired of kind of the culture war and the politics stuff of it. I mean, we even have a governor here in Idaho that said a few years ago that climate change is happening and it's real, but I really know that he's hamstrung to really do anything about
Yeah.
it, and we'll tend to stick to these things as much as we can. And I don't think some of the realities around coming to grips with climate change and starting to prepare for it, I think that's a bipartisan negligence in a lot of ways in our country. So it's not just uh one. So when I saw this story last year and we invited this guest on, I'm like, here's a place taking it pretty seriously and starting to think about it. And we're just talking about building higher seawalls around our cities.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're that naive to think that in our country these things we're going to be left unaffected, or we're crazy, because
Yeah.
I think, what is the statistic? 80% of Americans live within 100 miles of the coast. And here you have states like Florida and California where insurance companies are saying, we're out. We can't
Oh
do
yeah,
this
North
anymore,
Carolina house
you know?
insurance rates they were showing like by the counties and the Outer Banks
Yeah,
communities, which
yeah,
when I lived there, I'm like, I get why we're doing it, but I also question why, when a hurricane wipes out bridges and wipes out roads because the Outer Banks are just a sandbar, why are we subsidizing the reestablishment of that? Because we
yeah,
know this is the ramifications. And now getting insurance for a house in those areas is becoming near
yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, I think one of my favorites, and I'm obviously being sarcastic, is hearing about these bacterias and spores coming out of the thawing permafrost, and they've been frozen for tens of thousands of years. And like, oh yes, what possible bad can come from that, right? It's like the bad introduction of a new Ghostbusters movie or something. Oh man. Anyway. All right. Well, with that, let's turn our attention to an unconventional whiskey pairing here. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I think for today we're just going to go more with a beverage pairing, and Deden can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the pronunciation is teh manis, which in Indonesia would translate to sweet tea. So him being in Alabama, me being from the South, we're talking about stuff going on in Indonesia. There's our beverage pairing for the day. They probably don't do it iced over there, but I guess we can get that answer.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, let me just real quickly thank our partners at Planet Edison, and we'll jump into a good, lively discussion. So let's take a quick moment. Thank our friends at Planet Edison for supporting today's podcast. Looking to sharpen your urban planning skills and advance your planning career? Planet Edison Courses offers over 300 courses on cutting-edge planning topics and skills such as parking reform, missing middle housing, equity analysis, and climate resilience. Visit courses.planetedison.com/PC10 to take advantage of an exclusive offer for Planning Commission podcast listeners. All right. Now, on to our guest and a story you all are going to want to hear and listen hard to. Our guest today is Dr. Deden Rukmana, and he's a professor and chairperson of the Department of Community and Regional Planning at Alabama A&M University. And man, when you read this man's resume, I feel dumb. I feel so I am incompetent when I am speaking to this person because Dr. Rukmana, first of all, thank you for joining us, but boy, are you an accomplished person, and we thank you for gracing us with your time.
Thank you for having me. It's my great honor and pleasure here.
All right. So let's just start off with you. Talk to us about yourself, how this journey of yours began from Indonesia, your education, your background a little bit, and then coming over to the United States. And then we'll get into this story of Jakarta in a little bit. Start off with you though.
Thank you very much. So I was born and raised in Indonesia, my home country. And I get my planning degree in undergrad from the oldest planning school in Indonesia, which is in Bandung Institute of Technology. So after that, I work as a planner in Indonesia, in one of the small town in West Java province. So I worked there for about 8 years. And then I came to US to pursue my graduate degree. So I received master's in development and planning from University of Southern California. And from that, I received my PhD in urban regional planning from Florida State University. I worked a little bit, 4 months as a planners with Florida Department of Community Affairs. And then I landed my first teaching job at Savannah State University for 12 years. And I moved to Alabama A&M University in 2018 as a professor and department chair until today. So that's my little story there.
Nice. So, I mean, so you've been, I think there's a perspective here of just planning internationally. So you've practiced that in Indonesia. What are some things that make it better, make it worse, different challenges versus what's here? I can imagine some of your students are especially fascinated about that.
Let me start with this. When I was in Indonesia, and then I was student at the oldest planning school. So we received planning knowledge, theories based from our practice here in the US and Europe. And then for some reason, to me at that point, I feel, oh, we are okay. We can apply all those knowledge and practices from US or Europe come to Indonesia. And then when I came here, and then when I get my PhD in urban planning from Florida State, and then I do my own research, and then I realized that, hey, we need also to develop theory or practices of planning best and rooted from those countries. And as you know, now we have also a lot of practice from global south that we also apply here in the US, like bus rapid transit.
Yeah.
So this type of practice we learned from global south. So we should have this interconnected world now. We learn from each other because it's always good if we can learn from the best lesson from other part of the world and apply it to our area.
I like
it
how you
reminds
say
me, well, I worked for a consulting firm for a while that was doing work in United Arab Emirates. And it was interesting because the story at that time is they were getting a little toward their end of the British influence over planning. So they were looking to a lot of American firms, except they wanted to do things like put LA's freeway infrastructure in a much grander scale and stuff like that. And it was definitely one of these weird things because it was going against everything we were talking about in the US, but they kind of wanted that even bigger than we have it. So those were some of my exposures to that. So yeah, it is interesting how it does translate despite culture and legal frameworks that are much different there. Chris?
Yeah, I appreciate all of the comments because, I wish that all of us in the planning profession in the United States had the opportunity to travel abroad a bit at least, and to see, and even within the US, but just to get out of this bubble and to see other places and understand how things are done. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, I grew up in the LA area, home of an totally auto-centric landscape, right? I mean, it's basically the hub of it, and yet I didn't see a roundabout until I was in the military and was sent to Bahrain in the Middle East. And then I had a driver's license that meant I had to be the one to drive my air crew around in a stick shift little, little van and driving in this roundabout that I was not used to, and it was quite an experience. But I appreciated it and saw, gosh, why don't we have these types of things in the United States? And now we're seeing that. And I think in part to the point, that you're making, Dr. Rukmana, which is folks who are able to bring that knowledge base to the United States, and perhaps, United States planners heading abroad and taking their knowledge elsewhere, like Don just kind of, I think, described, which was happening in the United Emirates and other places. So give us a little bit about this story. Let's dive into it a little bit. The story about Jakarta, climate change, and I mean, if our listeners haven't gathered this yet, moving an entire capital city, a major or a major international city, very heavy population, moving it. I mean, I don't know if there's a bigger undertaking than that, but this is the beginning of the story. So if you would shed light on it for us.
Thank you. Yes, this is a big task and the most expensive project ever in Indonesian history and maybe in the world too. But Indonesia is not the first time, as you know. There are many other countries already relocated their capital to the new places. So Indonesia basically also need to learn from those countries. So I will also like to mention here Lagos, Nigeria, that they relocate their capital to Abuja. So I like to compare Nigeria and Indonesia because it's similar in terms of size of our country is similar in terms of the population of all our current capital. Jakarta and Lagos is similar because Lagos is also one of the mega cities in the global south. Same thing with the reason, because Lagos is in coastal city and very crowded. And then same thing with Jakarta. Jakarta, the population of Jakarta 10 million, but the metro or mega city of Jakarta come close to 35 million. So it's a huge area.
It's larger than the New York metro area for
Yes,
some perspective here in the US, right?
that is correct. Yes, so the only megacities that bigger than Jakarta with that size is only Tokyo. So yeah, so this is very, very, very big. And then, of course, with this huge size of population, and then not just that, but the rate of urbanization in Jakarta is very high, and this is what make burden of Jakarta is very, very, very heavy. The effect of climate change also, of course, is very, very distinct here in Jakarta. I've been doing this since 2006, following Jakarta urbanization and planning challenges. So in 2006, we had a big flooding in Jakarta, and then it's not just only that year, but year after, so it just like become annual flood, and then that flooding and also land subsidence. At one point, I wrote an op-ed in Jakarta Post, one of the English newspapers in Jakarta, and then it's about land subsidence, and Jakarta is sinking. So that was back in 2008. So Jakarta has been having those issues, yeah, very long time. But then the issue of the ideas of capital relocation of Jakarta is not the first time. Since the first president of Indonesia, Sukarno, back in 1950s, he already had this idea to relocate Indonesian capital to Kalimantan, to the same island with we have now. But the idea was terminated because of issues of financial constraint and other things. And then after Sukarno, other presidents after in 1980s, 1990s, 2000, so all presidents actually, they had this idea to relocate Jakarta. But this time, President Jokowi, when he announced back in 2019, I knew it that Jokowi will execute this idea. And I was not surprised that now we are here in the process of this relocation, and then the inaugural of that new capital will be in August, when Indonesia celebrates the Independence Day in August this year.
So it's definitely happening.
Yeah, it's ongoing process.
So you talked about the history of moving it, and that's been going on for a while. Was that inspired by what's happening elsewhere in the world with other countries? I mean, I just think of even like Brazil and creating Brasilia to be the capital district away from that. Has it been this thing that's maybe inspired from a long time ago with Washington, D.C.? What are some of the roots of that even before climate change?
So President Sukarno, the idea in 1950s, because he knew that Jakarta is planned for by the Dutch, by our because Indonesia colonized by the Dutch. So it's not a city that we plan for a capital. So that's why President Sukarno has this idea to relocate to Kalimantan, to Pontianak, to build new city as a capital, and also the location of Pontianak is more centrist to Indonesia. In Indonesia, we have also a term called Java centrist, because Java is the most populated islands, and then people think that the development just happening in this island, the other islands is not really part of the development. So that's why the idea to move the capital outside Java is also to give that context the development of Indonesia is also happening everywhere. So capital put in the center of nation is also that idea. So that's the ideas of Sukarno. But then when President Suharto, the second president, also have idea, but his idea just to move capital from Jakarta to the still not too far from Jakarta, about 30 miles away from Jakarta. It's just like the idea is just like Malaysia. They relocate the capital from Kuala Lumpur to Putrajaya just to get away from the crowdedness of this Kuala Lumpur. So that's also the idea of Suharto, just to reduce the crowd of Jakarta. But the idea was not taking place because also Suharto at the time also resigned as president. But then
So
the following,
Oh, go ahead.
but then the following president, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, also had this idea. But idea is just idea. But then Jokowi come with this idea again, and then it happened.
So I guess a little bit of perspective on geographically wise, what's the distance we're talking about that they're doing this? And then after that, what are some of the environmental, social, cultural impacts that are being considered with this?
So Indonesia is archipelago. We have so many islands, 17,000 islands, but we have 5 major islands. Java and Kalimantan is one of those largest island in Indonesia. And then Java population is very high, the proportion compared with the area of Java. In the meantime, other islands like Kalimantan, Sumatra, Sulawesi, or Papua, they have large areas, but they have less populations. And then Kalimantan, the location, geographical location of Kalimantan is in the center of Indonesia. So that's why to have a capital in the center of nation, like in Kalimantan, it gives that a perspective that the development try to be part of everyone in the country. It's not just Java-centrist, which is many people thinking, just like in China. China, East Coast of China is the most developed region of the country. So that's why for Indonesia to have something built outside Java is just like a good sign for other of the country.
So perhaps kind of help unify at the same time by making something more central. And I think for American planners, if we think about some of the states we live in, it's probably similar of like a city like Chicago and people elsewhere in Illinois feeling like it dominates the state, or we have that here in Idaho. Of course, this is obviously on a much grander scale.
Yes, I mean, primate city. Jakarta is primate city. That's correct. Everything is in Jakarta.
It's an interesting point. I mean, if in our own country we moved our capital to Omaha, what would that do? We often talk about the flyover states, and I know that the people who live in those flyover states really resent that. It's a term that's not a great one because I think folks feel underrepresented, and Washington itself is obviously a coastal city there, and I mean it is representative. So you have people, of course, coming from around the country, but what does that mean in terms of that representation, at least the image of it? So it's a great point. I'm going to transition to the most, the greatest political and economic challenges of this. And a couple of things come to my mind, but I certainly want your point. And that is, I can see one, it's occurring to me like, man, what are the logistic issues of moving a coastal city where you have a port and you have shipping and all of those types of things to then inland where the logistics of trade, for example, become much more complicated. And the other one that comes to my mind, and we see it in this country. Don just mentioned the city of Chicago. Sorry, Chicago, you have a long history of this, but that's corruption. And that is who gets who gets the contracts, right? Who gets the construction bids and all of that. And it's pretty easy, I would imagine, with all that money floating around to pad the bid by 20% or make sure you get that bid. I could see a lot of that happening, unfortunately. So what have you observed as the greatest political and economic challenges with this whole situation?
Oh, this is big time. This is big time. Very risk, the calculation here. Because if the capital allocation is cheap, of course, the risk is not that high. But it is the most expensive project ever in the Indonesian history. So that's why the calculation risk is very high in terms of political, economic, of course, right? And then this year, 2024, we have also presidential election. So that's why this capital relocation also become one issues that they discussed, they debated in these presidential elections. So we have three candidates for the presidential election this year. And then two candidates, they are fully support this capital relocation, and the third candidate is little critical about this capital relocations. So let me give you in the context. We already have this capital relocation as our new law. So last year, our representative already from bill become law. But the process of this law is very quick. So there are many critique about this law because it's not really engaged with the public and part of this participation. So that's why this little critic about that, not little, but big critic about this law, but it's already law. So that's why even this the third candidate critique about this capital relocation, but I don't think we can overturn that. Maybe it's another story if you overturn that law, but maybe the priority about how much budget from the state come to this capital allocation. That's another thing that maybe this third candidate will discuss, will offer to the people, to the voters.
So
but this is very, it's very big political and economic calculations. But to me, I really want to have this capital allocation succeed, but not in rush way, because moving capital is not just about building all these palaces, all these buildings in the new place, but also moving the people.
Yeah. And I mean, is this as much you've given us some context, I think, more so than we've been able to get in prep for the episode. So are we talking about primarily moving the seat of government there, but kind of other functions in Jakarta will be there? Is it also a migration of people beyond the government? What's happening from that perspective?
That's a very good question. Jakarta, like I said, we have 10 million in the city of Jakarta, and then 35 million with suburbs, or all those mega city, right? Of course, we will not move everybody there.
Yeah.
And then the plan is to have a population of new capital, which is we call Nusantara, by 2045 by around 1.9 million to 2 million.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's the estimation of population in that new capital. And then the first phase of this relocation is to move this civil servant, federal government, federal officials that work in Jakarta, they move there. And then I learned that the first stage is to move all these civil servants who knew, not the old one who already been in Jakarta for years, but the new, fresh, incoming civil servant working in federal offices to move to new capital. And then, as you know, Jakarta is very vibrant city, a lot of things in Jakarta. So that's why to have someone move from those type of city come to new city with less amenities and facilities also is another challenge.
Mm.
But go back to your question, Don. Jakarta, like I said before, is a primate city. So in terms of population, is the most populated. In terms of concentration of activities, is also there. So Jakarta is also not just about capital of Indonesia, but also center of business, services, manufacturing too.
Mm-hmm.
So everything. So if we compare here in the US, we have New York, and then we have Washington. So Jakarta is just like combined New York and Washington in one place.
Yeah.
So it's very crowded and very hectic.
Well, I just think of like basic, non-basic jobs, kind of that simple part of economics. You will have the civil servants there, but there needs to be the shopping and the restaurants and the airport and all these other things that come with it. And then just establishment of a local culture, a local thing, neighborhoods that haven't had 100, more than 100, whatever years to develop. I think that can be different and an interesting experience to watch in a modern age. What, in terms of your perspective, what are some of the pathways of action that the government of Indonesia, urban planners, and others should take to reduce the other impacts that are going to occur with this, impacts on local communities there, natural environment, culture, and other things? Because I can imagine that's kind of a shift. I go back to Chris's analogy. If we moved Washington, D.C. to the middle of Nebraska, that would definitely be a huge thing for the people that live in and around there.
So this is also something that I would say I like to critique of this process. To find the best place for new capital is not that easy. As you know, to have a new place, you need to have that land, right? And land is not cheap, and also other aspect too. And then to move capital to Kalimantan. Kalimantan is an island with, I would say, one of the largest tropical forests after Amazon. So the role of Kalimantan for the world is high because it's become lung of our world. And then what happened in Kalimantan in the past several years, Kalimantan also been transformed from tropical forest, become commercial forest. So more homogeneous forest there in Kalimantan. And then not just that, in Kalimantan, we have also coal mining. So there are some environmental issues there in Kalimantan. There is a commercial forest and also coal mining. And then when we moved capital to Kalimantan, of course, the issue is still there. And then also many local communities very close to this a new city, new capital, is not really involved. Just like I said, it's because of the process very quick rush. So that's why this process is not there. So that's why it's important for me to see this new capital. One is this new capital need also to preserve environmental issues. So this new capital need to show the world that, hey, we can still move to this type of place with all these challenges environmentally, but we can improve that conditions. So what I like to see more here is how with this capital allocation, Indonesia can also transform those commercial forests become another rainforest, natural.
Yeah.
And then same thing with this coal mining, how we can also, I would say, stop that mining, right? And then become more activities that more environmentally friendly.
So it's
that's
almost like it
something.
can be a laboratory to show properly how things can be done if you're able to start fresh and be as considerate of things that we know today that we didn't know 40, 50, 100 years ago.
That's correct. That's the point that I also share with New York Times, that if we can do this in Indonesia, it's good sign for the world, for the rest of the world, because hey, we can build something new from, I would say, from scratch in the environmentally sensitive location or challenging location, but we can improve that locations. So this is a challenge. How Indonesia can create a new capital in the middle of forest, but we improve the conditions. Before we have coal mining here and there, we have that degradation of environmental condition because of this commercial forest. So this is something that I like to see. That's why the brand of this new capital as a smart city, as the green city, sustainable city, should not just about term, but about how we execute the terms to improve the environmentally sensitive location. So this is big lesson, big time for Indonesia, but also for the world.
And would you say, I'm starting to realize too, this is a very different thing, because while this is being done from a long range planning, a pragmatic standpoint, let's prepare for this. You know, if the models are correct, we're going to be forced to do this on a much grander scale. So very different from other moving of capitals in history. I guess maybe going back to more ancient times where they probably had to do the same things. I can definitely see those ramifications there. And it sounds to me like this might be the first journey for what we've talked about, Chris, of the Planning Commission podcast, travel services and organizing trips to places to observe this. So, yeah. Chris, you had a question.
Well, I mean, gosh, in my mind, I'm sitting here thinking about the lessons that other places on this planet may help provide this move, the goods and the bads. The goods, you know, I think a lot of people have been talking, I think recently, I think it's Barcelona and the sort of the larger super block type of a concepts, because the middles are so, you know, people friendly centric, no automobile access and all of those types of things. You're not too far from Savannah, right? And thinking about the town square concept, I don't know that you can do that in a place with so many people and the density that you're looking, but I would imagine that there's borrowing from all around the globe. And on the flip side, I think it's at Dubai where they're creating islands in the middle of nothing and just pumping sand and building on top. I'm like, well, maybe we don't want to do, you know, we want to make it like you mentioned, a green city, ecologically more sustainable. But anyway, so I'm curious if you could talk about, are there any lessons like that planners have been borrowing from around the globe? And that takes will. Talk a little bit about that political will, the power that planners are being given, really, to create something out of nothing.
Good question. Based on my reading and research here, capital relocation is highly related with power, power of the government. And then I can attest here in the Indonesian case too, right, that the power of executive, which is the president, is very, very high in the execution of these capital relocations. The way we are doing this law in very short term is also because of the power of the government to engage with parliament, right? So that's my first point about the power, and then about the capital relocation in Indonesia, I also see this is also something that we need to show that a lot of things need to be considered. Like I said before, these challenges with environmental need to become focused. Indonesia, when I see the plans, they have this green cities. They have a high density public transport, pedestrian friendly. So to me, the plan is utopian, is good. But how we execute this plan is different. I just give you one story here. When this plan made, government tried to make this become public transit oriented, right, and pedestrian friendly. But what happened at one point, the plan was changed. They make this high, wide boulevard with 4, 5 lanes. So this is something that, for me, why we already have make good plan with this environmental friendly, high density, transit oriented, pedestrian friendly, but all of a sudden there is change. So this is a thing that I like people also need to to follow and then become critical of Indonesia in terms of that. So if we have good plan that adopt from everywhere, including sponge city, but then in the execution, there's something that we need to watch closely, because to me the stake of our discipline planning in this capital location is very high. There is no way, there's no point if we can create really good plan, smart city, green city, all those buzzwords, right? But then in the execution, it's not there. So that's something that I
was go ahead and finish your thoughts.
Yeah, so this is something that I need to share here. That planning is our discipline. We devise that plans. But for me, we also need to engage in the execution of the plan. And we need telling them, hey, it's not right. It's not come to the, something like that.
Yeah, it's like if we talk about executing a plan, we mean actually putting it in front of a firing squad. Because I think of one of the tasks back in our younger days I first put Chris on was a sub-area plan for a new area, and it won a Smart Growth Award. And then, of course, like you said with the boulevards, the traffic studies started coming in, and oops, nope, we got to do this, this, and this. And this award-winning sub-area doesn't look anything like the initial drawing. So I think the planning profession can all relate to that. And I want to make sure when we put this out there, especially through the Planetizen site and others, I want to make sure we get the right like Google Maps link so people can kind of go explore where this place is and in comparison to Jakarta to get an understanding of the context of it.
It just proves that the influence of traffic engineering is international. That maybe Texas A&M is getting all around the globe, right?
Alabama A&M.
No. Texas or University of Tech. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the engineering.
I got you.
The engineering minds that are coming out of Texas and
Texas DOT. And
yes, that's what I'm getting at. And I'm reminded of, I keep hitting. Gosh, man, we had a local developer who was not in the development game for his whole career, but is now. And watching this tutorial that he gave, interview, I guess I should say, about his process, his company's process. And the first thing he mentioned, the first step we look at is parking. And then they develop the plan. And the last thing that they look at is parking. And I'm just going, oh my gosh, it's a sickness. And now there's a new plan that this company has tossed out there. And you look at the overall concept design and you're going, oh my goodness, I don't know, 70% of the land is devoted to parking. And yet it's being, they're touting it as sustainable walk. Yeah, give me a break, 4 different parking decks and surface parking as far as the eye can see. But, we put a couple trees in. So, hey, there's something. And so anyway, I digress. So Dr. Rukmana, this story is quite compelling. And for our listeners and viewers, I would encourage you to take a good hard look at this because, I mean, again, maybe many folks who watch this show listen to it maybe in the United States. I know we have some international fans, but this is the fourth most populated country on the planet, just behind us, right? And this city is, if it was a city in the United States, would clearly be, one of the top, I think, five, if not more. And so this is a massive undertaking and only the beginning of far more to come. And I think we need to pay attention to this and recognize what is going to work, what maybe doesn't work, and how it all unfolds. So we thank you for taking the time to share this story and your work in particular. And again, we hope that for the best on this, and we look forward to seeing how it all unfolds. So let's turn our attention to the lightning round, though. Let's have a little fun and ask a couple of good questions. I'll start off, Don. Hopefully, you've got a few here. All right, Dr. Rukmana, you came from Indonesia. I'm sure the food culture was incredible, but now you're in Alabama. I want you to tell me what's your favorite and what's your least favorite of local Alabama cuisine. Come on, hit us with something good.
No. Let me start with the least favorite, barbecue. I know few people like barbecue here, but not for me. But of course, I like fried chicken here in Alabama. So there's something that I enjoyed, the salad is also something that I enjoy every time I went to a restaurant here in Alabama. I try to enjoy every meal here.
Yeah.
So basically, I have a lot of things to like here in Alabama.
See, I think
So-
like that Alabama white sauce, that to me, that's an underrated thing in the barbecue realm that a lot of people don't get and understand. And I'm always impressed if I go to a barbecue place somewhere else and they have that, because I think that's a local knowledge thing, but I can also understand that's a little hard to get over sometimes.
Well, let's start with a barbecue sauce. If I'm not mistaken, is that not mayo based?
Yes.
Yes. So let's let's start our culinary treat here with mayonnaise, and then add a ton of more sugar and all the other things. Like, that's quintessential America right there, buddy.
Well, I was my first question too was more also related to both a cultural thing and food, because I'm going back to the beverage of this episode and thinking of a country and a culture very deeply rooted in coffee. Especially, where do you get that fix in Huntsville? I mean, I'm guessing the Starbucks down the road doesn't quite do it. Do you have that stuff shipped in? Can you find good coffee there?
Oh, actually, Starbucks, they also have some Indonesian brand like Sumatra.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So yeah, I like those. But again, to me, coffee is universal. I'm not really. I drink coffee every morning and afternoon. But again, coffee is, I would say, universal. I like drink them, and then yeah, I enjoy it. But I'm glad that you said teh manis in the beginning of the show, Don. That's very very unique. But for Indonesian teh manis, we also put this in bottle. So that's why many Indonesians, they also like teh botol. So
Okay.
teh botol is bottle
Just
tea,
bottled
but
tea.
it's sweetened and it's
Okay.
cold.
All right. So there's a consistency there with Alabama. You can
Yes, that is true. Yes.
I don't know. I'm a little suspicious sometimes of knowing about the food culture in our country. Like, is the coffee from Starbucks actually Sumatran, or did it just get away with being able to call it that and it's really from Hoboken? Like, I don't I wouldn't be surprised if there's some way to get around that, and hopefully though that is the case. Okay, I got to ask you, when I was in the military, oh my gosh, honestly, frankly, one of the most frightening things I ever experienced, we were doing an exercise in the Brisbane area of Australia, but we were based up in Okinawa in Japan.
Japan.
So we had to fly back from Brisbane back up, and guess what we flew over, right? Obviously Indonesia. We were flying in the middle of the night, and our plane had lots of stuff in the back, all kinds of food that was loaded up because the Australians were super generous. And you all, the Indonesians, I'll say that because you're now in America, get some significant weather, like real weather. And we hit a thunderstorm cell as we're flying, and we dropped altitude significantly. I think it was like maybe 1,000 feet, like just like that. And everybody, we go flying around on the inside of the plane and stuff. And it's because of this tropical air, all the land masses and stuff like that. That's a very long way of asking you a question that's not really related to that. I'm curious this way. 17,000 islands. And I can attest looking out the window going, holy cow, there's a lot of islands out here, right? Like island, 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 island. Out of those 17,000 islands, how many of them have you been to?
So let me make it clear that 17 islands is including small, very, very small islands.
Sure, sure.
But the major islands I've been there is, of course, Java when I was born and raised, and I've been also in Sumatra, the second, another largest city, island in Indonesia, Kalimantan, been there, Sulawesi, and Papua. And of course, Bali, also the most popular island in Indonesia and in the world. I've been there in Lombok. So maybe number of islands, of course, still less than 20.
So by my count, you have 16,980 to go. We need to get you
that Indonesia Tourism Board travel passport to get a stamp for each island. That's a tough one to fill.
Yeah. I'm hoping that you get a chance to do the sabbatical thing, given you're a professor, and go island hopping and crank that number up a little bit.
I have to scout all these islands for capital city prospects. We need to just make sure we're getting the right one for that. What's your flight itinerary going over there? What does that look like?
Okay, good. So from Huntsville, usually sometimes I went to Atlanta. From Atlanta, go to Japan to Jakarta. Or sometimes I come from here to Houston, and then from Houston to Korea, Jakarta. Sometimes also from here, come to Dubai. From here to Chicago, Dubai, Jakarta. So many options.
Yeah.
But it's very long.
Which airline's been the best? Which one makes you feel refreshed when you get there or get back?
So I like United and also Delta.
Okay.
Very good. I got one more quick one. I'm just curious. I mean, you're the tip of the spear when it comes to academia and planning, and you're in there, man. You're in the classrooms and you're interacting with, anywhere from, I'm guessing, like 19, 20 all the way up to probably 30 and even in their 40s. What are maybe the top 2 or 3 issues or concerns that you're hearing from your students? What are they most interested in wanting to know from you?
Well, they like to come. They like to see. It's not just about what I telling them, what I'm showing them in my slides, in my videos, but they like to experience it. And I encourage them to experience this because traveling is the best lesson ever. And for planners, it's very critical too. That skill set to have mindset that we are living here interconnected. We make plan here in the US, we make plan me here in Huntsville, but also will be also connected with other part of the world.
I was going to ask you to sell the program to the prospective students out there, because we do some of those episodes, but I just think you just knocked it out of the park. You're looking at grad school, look at Alabama A&M. There's some opportunities there that you might not find elsewhere.
Thank you. Yes.
Just yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, I found myself watching, like a lot of people, Rick Steves traveling to Europe and wishing I could be in his shoes to experience these wonderful places. And I think he was in Turkey, and he had mentioned a city that I had never heard of. And I felt like a knucklehead not knowing it. 2 million people live in this city, and I'm going, how have I not heard of this? And it reminds me, to your point, that we have got to get out of our bubble, because in order for us to be better as planners, we have to learn from one another and see what is working and maybe what's not working to ultimately improve what we do, right? And now I have to book my flight maybe via United with your frequent flyer miles over to this city in Turkey and just go immerse myself in a city of 2 million, which is more than our entire state in here in Idaho. So anyway. All right. Well, Dr. Rukmana, we want to thank you for joining the Planning Commission podcast. We really, again, appreciate your time and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great,
Yeah,
great.
that was a great subject. So I think with that, you got another promo to do, or are we looking for motion to adjourn?
Yeah, just as a quick reminder to our listeners, head over onto the website. Lots of good stuff there. All our episodes, I think we're up to, I don't even know, 50, 60 now. Head on over www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Reminder, just like and subscribe and send us that email, man. planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. With that, looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Appreciate your time. Hey everybody, Commissioner Danley here. Would you like to see more, hear more? Well, we got you covered. Go to our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. It's got everything you want. Guests, yep, past episodes, video, the audio, even our whiskey pairing, links to everything about all the people we've had on, books, websites, you name it. It's unbelievable. If you want to reach out to us, please. We'd be more than happy to chat. You can email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to tweet at us, go for it, @planningcommish. We're also on YouTube with the Planning Commission Podcast channel, Facebook. Heck, send us a carrier pigeon if you need to. We'd love to hear from you about ideas, guests, you name it. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll keep doing our thing. You keep doing yours. Have a good one.